Hello friends, I'm back with another review of Jeremiah. This time we're looking at chapter 49. And you know that in this chapter we have a continuation of a section in which Jeremiah is speaking oracles against the nations. And in this chapter we have his oracle against Ammon, Edom, Damascus, that is Syria, Arab tribes, and Elam. These nations surround Palestine. The exception is Elam, which is all the way around to the east side of Babylonia, around to the other side of the Fertile Crescent, way beyond Ur, where Abram and Sarai came from, which just reminds us that God is not just our God, but He is the God of all the nations. I think that's a powerful thought. Now, just a few thoughts on this chapter. In verse 1, we meet Milcom, who is the national deity of Ammon. But this god, like all the other false gods, and his priests and attendants are going into exile. They are powerless before God. Verse 3. Edom. You may recall the bitter hatred that existed between Israel and Edom. When Judah felt the weight of Nebuchadnezzar's attack in 589 to 587 BC, Edom gave no assistance whatsoever to their brethren. In fact, there seems to be evidence that they collaborated with the Babylonians to bring Judah down. You might turn to that interesting Psalm 137 to note that. Edom would drink the cup of the Lord's wrath. But notice verse 11. Perhaps these words were spoken by some kindly survivor or by the Lord Himself. I choose to think by the Lord Himself. What we find there is a promise to care for the orphans and widows. Verse 27, Hadad was the storm god of the Arameans, and he was equivalent to the Canaanite god Baal. So in those days, when you called out, Hadad, you weren't calling your father, you were calling the Syrian god. Elam was famous for her archers in verse 35, and I like the picture that we have in verse 38, a picture of a conquering king setting up his throne in a land that he has defeated. The Lord says that He will set His throne there, way far away from the land of Palestine, but in the land of Elam. Now, some application. I would like to talk about our need to care for the helpless and the vulnerable, the widows and the orphans, but I won't. I would like to talk about God's desire to set His throne in every nation of the world, but I won't. What I want to talk about in more detail is what we find in verse 4 of this chapter, where Ammon is described as trusting in her treasures. And I'm sure you've noticed after 49 chapters in this lengthy book that one of the common themes in this book is, where will you place your trust? In whom or in what do you place your trust? What are you confident in? Or to keep from having that dangling preposition, in what or in whom is your confidence, your trust, your faith? And I think this is something we can take from Jeremiah in our study of this book, that it's wise to place our trust in God. It's wise for us to rely upon Him and depend upon Him. It's foolish for us to trust in anything or anyone else. So, there's the question for today. Where is my trust? In what am I depending, relying? Where do I place my confidence? That's a great question for all of us to ask as we finish up this book. A preview. Chapters 50 and 51 are all about Babylon. It's interesting that more is said about Babylon in these two chapters than about everything that is said about all the other nations combined in the previous chapters. Interesting. We're going to be finishing up Jeremiah this month, and I want us to begin now to think about what we'd like to pray through and read through after we finish this great book. I've got in mind a New Testament book, maybe Philippians or James or Titus or 1 Peter, It's going to be a short book, I guarantee you that. But you might weigh in on that, and we'll start that process soon. What would you like to read through and pray through together? We're going to talk about that in the coming days, because we'll be through with Jeremiah before we finish the month of August. And already August, boy, summer has flown by, hasn't it? Can't get over it. Okay, I'm going to see you again soon. We're going to get into some interesting reading in chapter 50, Jeremiah's oracle against Babylon. All right, see you in a few days.